You guys are all cozy and cute.
We'll pretend like we like each other.
I have a hunch that you actually do. It's just a hunch though.
Right? We enjoy each other.
Actually, I might move just because of the fact that, apparently I didn't play back in, it's better. I just left it in the bag, yeah. I feel like Tony. It's our oldest, he always forgets to plug his computer in.
Goes to school all unprepared.
Actually, yeah, we'll go over there. You got.
We will get started in just a couple minutes, folks. 1, 2.
We need to reverse prospects, and call those agents. We need to buy the stuff off Amazon for the birthday party.
That's.
Okay, that's better. It's good. Do a little screen share.
It was funny, right after yesterday's safety meeting, I went to a buyer consult. And the first thing I walked into this house and I'm like, okay, where's the exit? Because it was one of the first few times I'm like, I actually don't feel safe in a place.
Yeah. I'm glad we've just had this specific training.
Yes.
Can I get someone on Zoom? I know none of you have your videos on, but can I get somebody on Zoom to tell me if they can see my screen, the presentation?
I can see it. I can see it.
Thank you, Tracy. I can hear you, so that's, I can hear you and you can see it, so that's what matters. Thank you.
You're welcome. Welcome.
All right, I'm gonna grab a handout real quick and get started in 32 seconds.
No, man, what's up?
Press down.
What's up?
Ooh.
Busy morning?
No, rushing a little bit.
Fresh back from the gym. I don't know if you can tell.
Didn't even get time to change. I was like, all right, well, I think it's over there.
Yeah, there's the classroom over there.
Same spot as $74.
Okay.
Anybody wants 50 cents cheaper than everywhere else?
That's pretty good.
So that's why I was kind of rushing. I'm like.
I'll drive 30 minutes outside my way to save a few bucks on gas. All right, we will get started. Thank you for being in the room. Thank you for being on Zoom. If you know me, you know that I like to do things in as participatory a way as possible. So I will interrupt and ask you guys for feedback and questions, and I'm not offended by interruptions along the way as well. All right, real estate investing by the numbers. This real estate investing is a deep topic. It's a broad topic. It's a topic that I'm passionate about. But we could do courses every week for an entire year and not hit every aspect of real estate investing. So this is kind of investing 101, investing my journey, and understanding the numbers for those who are looking to take steps forward. Oh gosh, this is gonna annoy me. I'm trying to keep the chat up just in case people have questions as we go. So I'm gonna move it around as we go. And if you're in a position to take some notes, I've got this, a handout that I'm gonna share. And for those that are on Zoom, it's a screen grab of our 7th slide as far as key terms go, but take some notes as we go, because I want this not to just be informational, but I want it to be something that's actionable. So when people say, I want to learn more about real estate investing, I find that oftentimes there's two primary facets to it. One is I might be interested in real estate investing myself. And 2 is I want to be a better real estate agent. Ooh, am I recording? Hang on a second. I am recording. That's good. And I want to be a better real estate agent to help my investor-based clients. So take a second to take a note, give some thought as to why real estate investing matters to you. And I'd love to hear some feedback on that, because I think the who matters as much as the why, because all too often we become interested in a thing, we get distracted, we move forward, and we don't take any action on it. But when we connect it to the who, for me, it's easier to take some action. So Tara, I'll put you on the spot. Who is benefiting by you learning about real estate investing?
So mostly we want to do it for us, and we want to learn how we can get just passive income that way.
Cool.
But we do have some clients, but I personally don't like to focus on investing clients.
Sure.
So being knowledgeable enough to let our clients know what to expect, but it is more for us.
Cool. That's a great lens. Preston, how about you?
I am doing. I want to fund my retirement. With primarily real estate investing, or real estate, just investing in general. I'm not too well versed in stocks and all that kind of stuff. But real estate's what I know, and I just continue to grow my investing because I currently do invest and just kind of want to learn more.
Yep. Anyone on Zoom want to chime in on who benefits from your knowledge in real estate investing? Your knowledge or your action? Well, there's more in here than I realized. Hearing none, I'll move forward. So I put for your clients because that's an obvious one, for you because that should be an obvious one. And then I put for blank because I think all too often, and this was me once upon a time, we think, well, I'm good. And that's not, it's, we take care of our 4 walls first, right? But the opportunity to impact others, whether it's the next generation, leaving a legacy for our family, or it's giving generously to those in our world. Gary Keller will say that money is good for the good that money can do. And I caution us against thinking that's too small. At one end of the spectrum is greed, and I just have to have more because of ego, because of an unhealthy greed. The other end of that spectrum, which is, I would say, no more holy, is, oh, well, I'm fine, and kind of this modest Midwestern meager approach to life. And I think I want to ask the question, I don't need fancy things, but who in my world benefits from me building wealth? Because I think wealth may sound like a big, fancy, ostentatious word, but I would imagine there's someone in each of our worlds that benefits when we are building wealth, not just making ends meet. So that's a challenge to you if you're a modest Midwestern thinker, to think about who else stands to benefit. Just briefly on my journey, and I don't want to camp on this more than necessary, but to help make this approachable for you. So this month is actually 10 years since I made my first real estate investment, which is crazy. My journey started with education. That's where it starts. Reading these 2 books fundamentally, and for those that are on Zoom, How to Find, Buy, and Rent Houses for Wealth, and then The Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Gary Keller. I made $28,000 the year that I bought our first property. Bought a duplex, lived in one side, rented the other, and I kind of did it on accident. It was like, hey, I'm not making any money. This would be a good way to save some money on our costs. And then I began reading more along the way. Read some Robert Kiyosaki. This is pretty cool. So we moved 6 times in 8 years, kind of rinsing and repeating that process. Fast forward to today, we have 18 doors, and I know there's people on this call who have far more than that. but it's been a journey for us where choosing to live beneath our means, choosing to consistently reinvest. We've never paid ourselves money from our portfolio, and it gains power. So we're technically speaking financially free, which is a pretty cool thing. And now our goalpost is moving. Robert Kiyosaki. Preston, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Any guess what this
I used to know.
fill in the blank
It's been a while since I've read it.
quote is? So he will say, our assets fund our liabilities. Anyone want to take a stab at what that means, or what you think he's getting at when he says that?
Essentially, well, for him, or I disagree, is he considers your primary home.
We don't need to go too deep down that, but
It's essentially, you want to have assets that make money to pay for your lifestyle or, you know, your trips and that kind of stuff. You want to kind of let the passive income work, or let your money work for you.
Yeah.
for what your intended life.
your life, you have permission to expand your life as your assets give you permission to do so, is another way of saying that. Yeah, Preston's right. So Robert Kiyosaki's definition, an accountant's definition of an asset is anything that has value that's on your balance sheet. A car is an asset. A piece of jewelry is an asset. That's what an accountant would say, because it has some value and it's on your balance sheet. Robert Kiyosaki says, let's scrap that. An asset is only something that produces income for you. And so he would even say, to the point that Preston was beginning to make, that your house is not an asset because it's not creating income for you. I'm with you, Preston. It may not be kicking off monthly cash flow, but it should be growing in value. I should be paying down on it. So it's a useful tool, even if it's not that's not creating income for me. So what this means is, and I wish Christian were in the room right now. A few years ago, Christian said, I want a nicer car. He was inspired by this and says, I'm gonna go buy some real estate so that I can buy that car. It's a different mentality. And so as we think about growing our world and being generous, thinking, yes, I could work harder, or I could have dollars work harder for me, or assets work harder for me, which is effectively the more you own, the more little workers that you have working for you, which is pretty cool. All right, so I said this was a numbers class, and so we're just going to kind of walk through how we go about finding our numbers. And I'll also say we can touch on flips a little bit in this class. I'm not a flipper, and so I'm not going to be equipped to go as deep as some of you might be, for all I know. But I can speak the language of certainly buy and hold, as well as real estate investing numbers. So when I talk about finding your number, I'm going to put it through the lens of identifying your personal monthly cash flow goal. Yes, someone might invest in real estate so that they can get a big thing, or so that one day they can do X. But I think most commonly the framework to think of it in is, how much money do I need in order to replace my active income? So monthly cash flow goal. Every person's different. And the nice thing about when we think about freedom and we think about options and flexibility as it relates to wealth building, the lower that monthly need is, the easier it is to get there. Obviously, that's simple math. So we identify our monthly cash flow goal, and we do that by not looking at what we currently make. We do that by looking at what we currently spend. Those things change over time. Kids, health, those things evolve, but that's the starting place. 2, we make assumptions about the asset, and by that I mean, how many dollars per month do I expect to make from a given property? If I assume $1,000 a month, my math is going to be different than assuming $200 a month. But that's an important framework to have as well. We then we do some simple math and identify how many of that asset do we need. And then we chart the path to snowball those assets to get us to where we want to go. So in this example, and you guys are going to have to get your brains out and to do some math with me. I have the answer later, so don't worry. To kind of conceptualize this process. So if, let's say, my family spends $60,000 a year in expenses, We could debate about that number. That's not what we're looking to do. That's the number we're going to start with. So my goal then is to make $5,000 a month in profit off of my rentals. I'm assuming a $250 profit per door per month. We could debate about that assumption, but that's what we're working with here. Therefore, all right, help me out here. How many doors do we need in order to accomplish that goal? 20 doors. Nice, simple round number. All right, so now let's project that out. If my purchase price per door was $90,000, and I'm assuming roughly 25,000 is what I'm going to be using to put down for each door. So if I buy a $90,000 house, or if I buy a $180,000 duplex, let's assume a healthy down payment, and let's assume some closing costs. I'm being uber conservative in that number there. How long would it take for you to reach your goal if you reinvested your profits and added $10,000 a year personally? Any guesses? Because it's complex math that I did for us already, but any guesses on that? So effectively what we're doing is saying, hey, that I'm going to buy one with money that I saved up. I'm then going to use the money that asset is creating to add to that. I'm personally going to continue to add $10,000 a year. Any guesses on how long that's going to take? Drop them in the chat if you're. I'll give $1 to whoever's closest. I need at least 2 guesses. You're not going to figure it out on your calculator.
25 years?
25 years? Anyone want
I use them as a crutch. as well.
to? She's like, ah. 25 years, going once, going twice. All right. So this is the math. And I can share my spreadsheet with you that calculates this, but I'm assuming basically that first column on the left is your monthly profit. So as we add doors, that monthly profit grows by $250 a door. The second column is then what is that annual number? Okay, year one, I've got one property that's $3,000 a year in profit, then 6, then 9, and it snowballs from there. If I'm personally adding 10, and then that total is, and then so the door rate, basically I'm dividing $30,000 or $25,000, excuse me, into, actually, I think I did 30. I think I did 30, which would change that number. But regardless, or if that was my assumption, it's a little over 18 years and 3 months in order to hit that goal. Now, let's just have a conversation for a second. What would enable you to shorten that length of time?
Putting more down, more than the 10,000.
Yeah, personally investing more than $10,000 per year. Yep, absolutely. That's a if you want to be a real estate investor and you're not willing to invest personally $10,000 a year, you're fooling yourself. I think there's too many people that are trying to like hack their way into real estate investing. 10 grand a year, $800 a month, or $8,300 a month. Or $830 a month, excuse me. We should be able to do that work. What else? So add more money than that. Any other levers we can pull?
Can you sell off, use the profits from the sale and reinvest it?
What does that do for you?
Well, I mean, that gives you more money to put towards additional doors, maybe buy 2 houses at a higher return.
Yep, and that assumes that you can buy low and sell high, or buy low, do a little bit of work, and kind of that's a flipping holding combo, which is a common and winning combo. My personal journey, I said I'm not a flipper. I have never intentionally flipped a home, but of our 18 doors, I've probably purchased 25 properties over the years. I either don't like that property as much as I thought, or I've got more equity there than I'm earning on. We'll talk about ROE in a few minutes. But I'm going to sell it off so that I can do something more powerful. But the goal of that, Mike, to get to the point is, doing that enables, yes, it enables you in theory to buy more doors. It also enables you in theory to buy better doors. And so the other like lever that we can change, I'm looking at column, that first column there is if we changed our assumptions from 250 a door to 350 a door, the math changes. To $500 a door, I have a couple properties that are in $480 per door. And I have some that earn $90 per door. So the better we do, the faster it becomes, the fewer doors we need in order to get there. So formulas are meant to be amended and broken over time, but they help provide a helpful framework for us. And I do need to adjust that number because I'm 90% sure that I divided it into 30, not into 25. All right, so let's talk about key terms. And so if you're zooming, this is the spot to screen grab. If you want, people in person are going to get a handout, and we'll talk as we go. This is the stuff that I'm going to say that it's good to know all of these terms. Frankly, I don't use most of these terms in my day-to-day investing. But if as you're working with investors, knowing these terms helps you to not look or feel incompetent. All right, cap rate. Cap rate is the return that your money would make if it was unlevered. And by that, I mean, if I were to buy a property cash, what would the real return on that be? When I buy something with money down in a loan scenario, the cap rate scenario doesn't apply as much. And the reason we look at cap rates is an investor in a cash situation wants to be able to evaluate, is this any better than the stock market? If I'm getting a 4 cap, which is investor speak for a 4% return on my money, I'm going to assume that I can get 7 or 8 or 9% in the stock market with a whole lot less hassle. And so understanding cap rate is important.
And
And
when you say cap rate on it, the return, are you talking about the monthly return that you get over the period of like the year, or are you talking about just what you can resell it for?
it's the net operating income. So I got ahead of myself a little bit there. So the fifth one down there, NOI, is short for net operating income. And so the cap rate, it's a formula, is NOI divided into the value of the property. We calculate NOI.
Show the triangle, makes it really easy.
You can't, I'm not entirely sure what you're talking about there.
So you can have so you have your NOI, so we'll just say NOI for income. To calculate either one of these, you're going to either divide income by your rate if you already know the cap rate, or you're going to multiply rate by value to get the income, or you're going to divide the income by value to get the rate, the cap rate. So what you were just saying is NOI divided by
into value. Yep.
And then for the, it's just if you need to calculate either one, but you have two, you can calculate.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. I've seen that before, and it's not something that I've mentally conceptualized, but that's helpful. So that's helpful. And where it's helpful. So let's just jump to NOI real quick, and then we'll jump around a little bit. NOI, net operating income. And this is a classic inexperienced investor errors that say, oh, this property makes me $500 a month. They probably mean the gross rent minus the mortgage is $500 a month. That is not NOI. NOI actually doesn't factor in your mortgage and your debt service at all. So NOI is gross income minus expenses. So expenses are utilities that you'd be responsible for, insurance that you're responsible for, taxes that you're likely responsible for. It's typically going to factor in maintenance and vacancy. It's a conservative picture. As in owning this property, I'm going to have costs. And jumping up actually to the 50% rule, the 50% rule basically says 50% of your gross monthly income is going to go towards expenses. You know, in a real rough and dirty rule of thumb. So if I rent a unit for $1,000 a month, this rule would say I can expect $500 a month in some sort of expense that doesn't factor in my mortgage costs. So that's a different scenario altogether. I think you can do way better than the 50% rule, but when an investor talks about it, that's what they're talking about. So then in calculating the NOI, so net operating income is gross income, so $1,000 a month minus expenses. Let's say those expenses are $300 a month. That created $700 a month in NOI. We then divide that number into the value of the property. So let's say we bought the property for $100,000, and it's creating $700 a month in income. We multiply that 700 times 12. So $8,400 a month is our annual NOI on the property. And so that would be an 8.4% cap rate. Does that make sense? You're effectively earning 8.4% on your money in that scenario. I jumped around a little bit there. Was that compute? So that's cap rate. I don't use cap rate. For me, there's a couple down here that matter more because I'm not a cash buyer at this stage of my career, and that's what matters most for cash buyers. 1% rule. The 1% rule I'm going to describe as a quick and dirty rule of thumb for me to evaluate whether a property is worth looking at more closely or not. So the 1% rule says that it's going to be a solid investment if I can make 1% of the purchase price of the property in gross rents each month. So if I buy the property for $100,000, the 1% rule would say that I can rent it for $1,000 a month. If I'm looking and say I can rent it for $650 a month, it's like, well, might be able to make money on it depending on how levered I am in it. But for me personally, I'm not going to look closely at a property if it doesn't meet the 1% rule. The reason that a lot of people are interested in investing in Northeast Ohio is because you can do a whole lot better than the 1% rule. Let's have a conversation for a second, because some people say the 1% rule, that sucks. You should be getting at least 2 or even 3% in certain areas of Northeast Ohio. Why might that be not the direction that you want to go? Anyone want to take a step?
Riskier properties, riskier areas. Typically, a higher cap rate is kind of calculated. You can see a higher cap rate, you can tell it's kind of a riskier investment. Lower cap rate is usually a little safer.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive because when we're investing, of course, I would want to make as much money, as high of a return as possible. But then when you actually start, so let's just run an example with the 3% rule. That means, oh, I can rent it for $1,500 a month. That means I got it for $50,000, and doesn't mean that $50,000 house can't be in a neighborhood that you'd want to own in, but it's likely to mean that $50,000 house neighborhood is going to have some hassle that you may or may not want to. So for me, I'm a 1% rule investor. My properties I've got a few single family homes that are $90,000 to $160,000 in value, and then I buy duplexes. Duplexes at 180 is kind of my personal sweet spot. You know, I bought duplexes this year that I bought for $160,000. I knew I could rent for close to $2,000 in neighborhoods that I was happy with. So that's the 1% rule. It's a quick and dirty. I've touched on the 50% rule. I'm going to skip over the gross rent multiplier because that's more for people that are working with like apartment investors. That is not as likely to be where most of us start. I've touched on NOI. So that's net operating income. Cash flow, who wants to take a stab at what cash flow is?
It's I call it just your pure profit of, because it's not just, mortgage minus rent, it's minus all of your expenses. It's literally what you can pocket at the end of the day.
Yep. Great job. Gold star. I was hoping to trip someone up by putting profit just beneath it, but cash flow and profit are the same thing. And as I mentioned before, far too many inexperienced investors say, oh, it cash flows this much per month. And it's the equivalent of Jose saying, oh, well, I paid my staff, therefore everything after that is is gravy. It's like, well, do you have lights to keep on? Are there some repairs to make? Are there services that we're providing? Let's not under account for the costs. So cash flow and profit are synonymous, and being conservative and factoring in expenses, as you touched on, Preston, is crucial. All right, cash on cash return. This is one that I look at more closely. So if I'm an investor that uses loans to acquire properties, cash on cash is kind of calculating the true return on investment of my money. And for me, hey, if I'm putting money into the stock market, I'm going to assume 8%. We could debate about that. And so if I'm doing a real estate deal, I want to do better than 8% on my money. So that's cash on cash is kind of my version of a cap rate, even though it has more of a nuanced approach. So we calculate cash on cash by basically saying, what do I have into the deal, and what do I get back on the deal in a given year? So if I put $30,000 down and in closing costs on a property, if I put, let's say, $5,000 into light refresh and replacing some fixtures and putting a little paint in before I get tenants in, and then that property generates $10,000 in profit for me in that year, my cash on cash return, let me calculate this, is going to be the 10,000 into the 35,000. So even though the property is worth a lot more than that, the real return, was 28.5%. I put in 35 and I got 10 back, so 28.5%, which is pretty good.
And that's an annual number too. So if you do times 3, you almost made all of your money back in 3 years, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. You've recycled your money, and that's a Kiyosaki principle, is basically pull your money out as fast as you can, or get your original investment back as fast as you can. So in 3.5 years, I've paid myself back, and I'm able to, either walk away saying everything's gravy from this point, or I'm reinvesting and my snowball is growing with speed. So cash on cash is big for me. Preston and I, we partnered on a deal 2.5 years ago now. January it'll be 3. And yeah, right. And basically when, he brought the deal, we had an arrangement, and I basically said, I need to know that my money is earning at least this much. And we drew up our arrangement that way. And I arrived at that basically because I have personal cash on cash standards. And it worked out. So that's one that, you'll use, in my mind, more frequently than cap rate if you or your investor is working with loans. ROI, Mike, what does ROI stand for?
Return on investment.
Yep, that's similar to cash on cash. ROI is going to be a more generic term. ROI is what you put in and what you got out in relation to one another. One important thing to note about the cash on cash and ROI bit is we think about my return on a property as being just the cash flow relative to what I put in. But what other financial opportunities do we have beyond cash flow? Preston, I'll tap you because I know you know some of this stuff.
Well, like, are you talking about like increasing cash flow, or?
No, I'm saying outside of cash flow, what other financial benefits exist in owning that property?
I mean, obviously value is going to go up over time.
Mm-hmm.
So your equity just grows. Your equity also grows by your tenant paying down the mortgage.
Yep. So you're kind of widening that gap, which is your equity. Yeah. Absolutely. Any others that you can think of?
You can borrow against it.
Sure. Yeah, that's not necessarily a return based number, but it's an option, like it's a tool. And then there's tax benefits as well. There's the costs of owning a property are you can count as losses, and you should. The tax benefits of owning rental properties are massive, and we could have a whole separate conversation around that. Tax-Free Wealth is the book you should read on that conversation. But all that to say, my framework is I want my cash on cash number to hit based upon cash flow alone. And then all of those other factors I know are going to be working, but I'm not baking them into my assumptions. And so it's like, no, I want my cash to make 10 grand or 10% per year. And then as the property grows, as the debt goes down, like all of that is making it that much more powerful, because those other factors aren't coming into play until you sell, typically speaking. So the equity is growing and the debt's being paid down. Like, oh, when I sell it, then I capture that. Or if I do refi and pull some of that money out, there's options there, but I'm not necessarily realizing that on a year in, year out basis. ROE. So this is my one of my favorites that you're not going to run into all the time, but that's return on equity. This one is a helpful tool, not so much for should I buy a property, but what should I do with a property that I already own? So as we think about the other kind of numbers that we're analyzing and considering here, ROE comes into play. And I'll just use a specific example right now. I own a single family home down near the Hall of Fame. The gross rents are $950 a month, where it should be a couple $100 more easily. I bought it for 90, this property, and it's easily worth 145 today. Meanwhile, I've paid down the debt. I owe $68,000 on that. So the 145 minus 68, what is that? 80-ish. You take out some closing costs, like let's call it $70,000 in equity. Meanwhile, with our current rents, I'm making about $100 a month in cash flow. So the ROE would say my return on the equity. So if I've got $70,000 sitting there, it's creating $1,200 a year as is in income. So 1,200 into 70 grand is 1.7%, which is poopy, as my children would say. And so in that situation, it's like, well, okay, that number stinks. Doesn't mean that I have to sell, but it means I'm missing out on opportunity every month that this passes. So I could sell it and capture that equity and reinvest it and buy 2 more properties that quintuple my cash flow or beyond. I could give the tenant a kind note that says, I love you and you don't have to leave, but these numbers don't work anymore. You can stay if you're willing to pay this amount, but it helps you to calculate the real relationship. And that's frankly, when someone says, I just want to buy a property and hold it for forever, you're allowed to do that. But often every 5 to 7 years, you're going to be looking and saying, I've got a big chunk of change that I could do something else with. Now, doesn't mean you have to sell the property. You can pull money out. But I think ROE is an important framework for people that are investors and are seeking to make decisions in their business. And then ARV. Some of you have probably worked with investors who say, hey, what's the ARV on that? And you're like, quick Google. ARV stands for after repair value. It's a pretty squishy term that's thrown around a lot, particularly by wholesalers. Oh, check out this property. The ARV is 300. And that ARV is simply an opinion. It's not what the market said that they'll pay. It's just like, oh, if the property is brought up to market standards, which is a very general term, and realtors, as realtors, we have advantages here because we can do good comps. You've got one right now. It's like, oh, well, I've got one, and there's one just down the street that just sold for this that has some strong similarities. Therefore, I feel pretty good that it's worth maybe not that, but close to that. And so you've had a good process there. But this is a term that's going to more commonly be used for people that are looking to move to whether flip a property or rehab a property and eventually move on from it and understand their opportunity there. These are more for value add investors. Any questions or any of them that are murky that I could spend another minute on? Cool. All right. So as we kind of talk about our process, determining your process or developing your process for analyzing investment properties. First, we determine our ROI expectation. So I said earlier, 10% is my minimum. If I'm not earning 10% on my money, it's a waste of my time. Some people will have a per door, Andy Alamini has a $400 per month expectation per door. And so gaining clarity there, and I always encourage as much being as conservative as possible in that expectation. Am I happy with this if it only hits that? It has to hit that, but it should do a lot better than that. Determine the buy box. The buy box is, and this is hard if you're a newer investor. It's like, I don't know, I want a good deal on a good property in a fine area. Like it's hard to know until you've really begun paying attention and you're driving those streets, so to speak. But the buy box is, if you're looking at everything, then you're looking at nothing. So it's, hey, I'll just use you, Preston, like, hey, Canton South is my sandbox. It's a community that I know and love. It's a community that I'm dialed into what's happening with the businesses in the area. And so I'm going to be looking more in that community. But then it's also going to say, hey, some people are going to buy apartment buildings in my community. I'm not there at this point. I would rather buy 3-bedroom homes in between $120,000 and $200,000 in value that aren't older than 1940. I'm making this up as I go here, and are on city utilities. I'll just use those as examples. And a buy box can always be tweaked, but what it does is it helps give you a filter. And the more you look at a specific thing or a specific asset class, the better you get at seeing value. If all you do is, if Preston just had a search for Stark County homes under $200,000, he'd be spinning his wheels because a bunch of those are hitting every day. You don't know all of those neighborhoods. Like, wait, that one's brick, that one's vinyl. I don't know. But when you zero down, you sharpen your ability to see where value is. So for me, I'm a side-by-side duplex investor in primarily Stark County. I've got one that's not in Stark County anymore. And so like I know those values pretty well, and I know the neighborhoods that I'm interested in, and I know the neighborhoods that I'm not interested in. Because I've been paying attention to that particular asset class. If it's an up-down duplex, I'm not looking at it because I have personal preferences as it relates to up-down duplexes. Doesn't mean that that's what it is for you. And then you search, and that's obvious. But as is true in real estate sales, we find deals by looking at lots of things and getting high exposure. So setting yourself up on searches, putting feelers out there is crucial. Then we're analyzing some of the numbers that we've talked about. So obviously we're analyzing the purchase price. Okay, it's listed for 120, or I think I could get it for 120. Some deals are on market, some deals are off market. We are accounting for the rehab or refresh costs. To me, rehab means this house has problems, so I need to fix them. Refresh means this house could look better than it does. Yeah. Everyone's going to do different things, but if you're getting started, I would encourage a more cosmetic approach than a guts approach, because the cosmetic stuff is going to be lower cost, higher bang for the buck. Whereas like getting a new, fixing a foundation has to happen, and it's expensive and it's unsexy, and the market isn't going to like reward you for that. They're just going to not penalize you for having that. Whereas like, oh, this looks nice and the lighting is nice and the wallpaper's gone. It's like, and it's got like inexpensive but nice looking flooring, like those, it looks clean. Yeah, those are needle movers. So be modest there. And my warning in parentheses there is every flipper I've ever met when getting started has overspent and underestimated what they expected, what the eventual expenses were. So if you don't have experience there, have a contractor that can walk it with you. And if they gave you a number, and the same is true for any project you do at your house. A good contractor is going to build in contingency. I'd say add a little more contingency beyond that for yourself. You're never going to be mad at yourself down the road for having been too conservative in the way you projected the deal. Oh, darn, I was too conservative. I therefore have more money than I expected and can do something with that. The reverse can get you into real trouble. Yeah, exactly. Then we're going to calculate the monthly gross rental income, and I'm going to show you where we can do that when we run an example in a situation. Then we evaluate the holding expenses. So, okay, it's listed for 120. I'm going to need to put, let's say 10 into it in light refresh. So I'm all in cost wise at 130. I think it could rent for $1,500 a month. Okay, that's an exciting number. You may not get that at that price point, but then I'm going to be accounting for holding expenses. So I'm going to the auditor site to figure, okay, what are my annual costs as it relates to taxes? In residential investing, you're almost always paying the taxes. In commercial investing, you can more easily have your tenants pay taxes. Your insurance, what's that going to cost? That's not going to be a massive expense, but it's an expense you need to consider nonetheless. And then utilities, if it's on public utilities, traditionally the scenario is such that the tenant's going to pay gas and electric, and you're going to handle water, trash, sewer. But those are all negotiable as well. But you don't want to miss those, and those are the things that people traditionally kind of gloss over. Oh yeah, it's there, and then those are deal killers. And I had an example when we were investing back in St. Louis, where we were buying a mixed use property. It was 2 apartments and then 2 business spaces. It's a solid deal. We were going to be living in one of the units. It was our last house hack. My saint of a wife was along for the ride. And then when we were running insurance costs, because it was a different type of property, I had been assuming $2,500 a year in insurance, which to me felt about right. But because it was a different type of asset, I got quoted $7,000 on insurance. And an investor that would just have been, whatever, it'll work out. It's like, no, that's literally a deal killer. Like I would have been losing money in order to own that property, which sometimes you own properties that lose money in the short term to make money in the long term. I wasn't in a stage where I was willing to do that. We were able to work it out and find an insurance carrier that could cover us for a more reasonable price. But all that to say, since that moment, it's like, just don't make assumptions about that sort of thing. If you're buying a single family home, your insurance is going to be $800 a year, unless it's in a floodplain, unless there's a big dead tree looming over it, and insurance, as we know, and taxes are not getting any less expensive. So don't be naive there. And having a quality insurance agent that you can get easy quotes on is obviously something that's important as an agent, but also helpful as an investor. Cool. So let's actually take a look at a property. So I just really quickly went to the MLS to find a house or a duplex that was recently listed by my good friend Dominic Fonte. So we're going to go there, and we're going to just take a look at some things. So this is 825 14th Street Northwest in Canton. I'm not going to violate any fair housing laws, but knowing your community matters. That's very much in Canton City. I own a property in 44703, and so I know that community, but that's going to vary here. We actually have some data here. So we have it's listed for $129,900. It was listed 2 weeks ago. One little PSA with regards to buying on market rental properties is that if you're looking at it in the first week, it's probably not going to be a great deal for you. Like I don't bother looking at something that just went live unless I'm just waiting for it to become you want to have negotiation power. And so if you're in multiple offers on a duplex, I just don't personally do that. So listed for $129,900. It's been on the market for 2 weeks as of this morning. Right now we got, they're 2-bed, 1-bath units for a total gross monthly rent of $1,045. Other notes here. So the taxes are $1,000. That's going to be on the half year. Yes. So we're looking at just under $2,200 a year in taxes. I'm going to assume $800 a year in insurance. We see in the notes here, wonderful opportunity for an investment. It's being sold as is. So, they're not looking to play ball, as is classic with, investor properties. They are not showing more pictures. We can see a window unit there. So it's not likely on central air, but we can find out more about that.
Is 395 normal?
No.
I would say that is tragically low.
650 seems a little low for a duplex in the area.
So we see it's month to month. So that means when I buy a property, I can give a notice of non-renewal to those tenants. I can give a notice of, here's 30 days notice of rent increase. I've never purchased a property and just straight up evicted someone. You know, I would if they were clearly misbehaving in the property, but not for those reasons. I think having quality tenants is worth its weight in gold, and you don't want to rush people away if they might be living there. But that being said, if I'm looking seriously at this property right now, if I'm looking at the 1% rule, I want this property to create $1,300 a month in gross rents as a minimum, and we're at 1045. So we're not there. 1045 into 129.9 is, yeah, like the 0.8% rule. So it's actually not super far off. And if one of the units is renting for 650, that tells me that the one downstairs has been there for forever, and it's a sweet, kind landlord that is making money because he bought it for forever ago. And that you could probably get that second one rented for 650 as well, which makes it a 1% property. And because this other one is also month to month, that means they've been there at least a year in most cases. Not many landlords are going to start someone off just straight out the gate on a month to month. Typically you go there after they've been there for a while. So that tells me you've probably got some wiggle room regardless. But what I'm then going to do is I'm going to show you. So one of my favorite tools is a website called Rentometer. As is true with everything, there's a paid version and a free version. I got the paid version because I do this a lot. Honestly, I forget what it costs. I want to say it's like $60 a year or something like that.
Small investment.
Yeah. If you're doing this, it's, small price to pay. And so what I can do, what's our address? Address is 825 14th Street Northwest. There it is. I'm going to say, I want to see if these units can rent for $800 a month. These are 2-bed units. They're 1-bath units, and you can do a smart radius, or you can do a tighter radius. I'm going to do, see what they give me for smart, and let's see what happens here.
So it looks back around the area.
Yep. And what it does then is it tells me in this area. Now, what it doesn't say, it did filter for 2-bed, single-bath rentals. And I know that there aren't too many 2-bedroom single family homes. So we're most likely looking at duplexes. But it's not going to give me details on. Actually, I can. The reason I paid for the pro report is I can look at all of their comps. But all that to say, here's the ones that are lower, here's the ones that are moderate, here's the ones that are higher. It tells me that the average is 900. And if I were to list it for 8, I'd still be, very, very reasonable. Now, this is providing that it's in condition that's comparable as well. So then I'm not a representative for Rentometer, so I'm not getting paid on this. I can look at more details. I can look at trend lines. So here's a historic trend line on rents for the area. Okay, rents change over time. Surprise, surprise, they've gone up. Average rent by bedroom type, so on and so forth. Then it's going to give me a closer look where I can actually look the square footage of these units. I can look at the price per square foot. Is this a house or a condo or an apartment situation? When was it last seen? So I can get better data. And then frankly, I could even, try to look those properties up on the MLS or on RPR or somewhere to see condition wise. And for me, like, as is true with any comps, they're not the be all end all, but they provide a helpful framework to say, oh, I thought we were low. It turns out we are. That doesn't mean that we have to raise prices, but let's at least realize that tenants love a victim mentality. Man, how could you do this? I have a tenant not too far from here who she had been living there for a couple of years. She was paying $720 a month for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath with a garage side-by-side unit. And I'm like, you can leave or you can stay, but the new rent's gonna be $950. Gave her 90 days notice, which is more than what I was required to do. And even still, she complains about like, well, I'm paying $200 a month more now. I was like, that's what places cost. I wasn't HGTVing the place. The place is safe. It's in good condition. But that's what the world costs. Yeah, that's the market. And if you're going to go look somewhere else, that's what you're going to be paying. And so this is helpful to move from ideas around rent to reality around rent.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So do you deal directly with the tenants, or do you have a company that manages?
I have a property manager. Yeah. Yep.
So are they just really complaining them and hear about it, or like?
The tenants that were there before I hired the property manager. So I hired the property manager in November of last year.
Yeah.
And so the tenants that were there prior to then have my number, and they're still learning to go to the property manager. All that to say. But most of my tenants I've never met. I don't have their phone number. I could get it if I needed to. I don't have keys to most of my properties. Because I don't need to. I've got a property manager that does that. And in my world, if you know me, you know that that's better because I lose stuff. I'm disorganized. So we have a sense for the expenses. We have a sense of the rent potential. Mike, what do we think? Just on real broad brushstrokes, what do we think about this as a potential rental opportunity?
I mean, follow the 1% rule, and I would like, personally, I'd like to see a little bit more about what the actual expenses are.
Mhm.
I don't know if those would be in the supplements or not, because if the costs are above the 50%, you know.
They won't be. I would be surprised if they are. But yeah, we got the RPD, or the RPD exemption, of course, which is more common in investor style homes.
So the taxes are $1,000 per half.
Yeah,
Are you sure? That sounds really high.
Yeah.
it might be for full. It should be for half. Like that's what this number should be, but he may have. So
Arnold, right there, that 14. And, with Arnold.
what's ours on annual
Probably between $600 to $800.
in annual taxes? Okay, so let's say that that's an annual number then. So annually, so let's just figure it. So 1,083 annually. I'm going to say $800 a year annually in insurance. You can probably go lower, but conservative is always good. Utilities, that's where you need to either know or call the city. I conservatively like to do $100 a month per utility. So water, is Canton water, sewer, trash all under one thing? It's all Canton City.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think 100 is honestly pretty accurate for all of those. Do you know what ours is for Arnold? I know it's in our spreadsheet. Don't worry about it. So really you're looking at like rough and dirty, roughly $300 a month in holding costs.
Yeah.
Then it's a question of how you would finance it. So I'm going to pull up my loan calculator. So let's say, hey, Dominic, I'm coming in, I'm going to pay list price for it. I'm going to buy it for 130. And let's assume a 7% interest rate because it's typically a little bit higher for investors. Of course, there's an ad that I have to win.
About 104,000.
You calculating it for me?
Yeah. there's-
Calculator.net. That's really
Yep.
good calculators.
And I build in the amortization.
30 years?
Yep.
$692 is what I have in monthly debt service. Does that sound right? I'm gonna say 692, 104 at 7% interest rate, 30-year AM note. So 692, add 300 to it. Let's just call it $1,000 a month, and that's pretty conservative. You should be able to do a little bit better than that expense wise, but $1,000 a month in expenses for a $1,300 a month gross rent. So in your cash flow there is $300 a month, so $3,600 a year, and we put 26 grand down in that scenario. So our cash on cash year one is 13.8%, which isn't exciting, but isn't terrible. And it should get better over time. What we didn't factor into that number is you better believe that the unit that's renting for $395 a month, if you're going to get it to 650 or 8, you're going to be doing work on that property. And so like in my mind, as I'm looking at that, the big variable is like that first unit, 650 a month. I'm not excited about that, but I can abide that. I can't abide 395. Like I'm losing money at the 395 one. And so that tenant either needs to move out or get with the times. And so if I'm going to get that $100 to $800 a month, the question then goes to what am I investing in that side in order to get it rentable at that rate? And that's going to impact your cash on cash. So if you're putting an extra 10 grand into that side, which may be a reasonable number, that changes your number to 36 grand. And then it becomes a 10% cash on cash return. Does that make sense?
Question.
Yeah.
Related, but not necessarily. Okay, so I'm looking at the 395. So it's a what if scenario.
Yep.
So what if it is, because I've just seen this, like elderly on fixed income. The previous owner made it 395 because that's what they get from the city or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do in the situation when you're like, we really do need to increase this price because that's just what makes sense? And so are there somewhere to direct this person to make sure that they don't end up on the street?
Tracy, I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute, not knowing all of the rentals that you have, but knowing that you got a bunch of them. Do you want to talk about Metro and that side of things?
So unfortunately, in that situation, I've had that situation because I have a 53 unit that I bought 5 years ago. Most of those people were on Social Security, low income. I had to come in and raise rents because I didn't get it at that price. At that point, there is no fair housing protection on rent for low income. Once again, you have to go with your qualifications. There's really not much guidance. You can tell them to go try to get Section 8, apply, but it takes a long time. Unfortunately, they just have to move or they have to pay the rent.
Yeah.
There's not a lot you can do for people. Unfortunately, it is very sad. And with all these low income people these days on Social Security at $900 a month, I get all those calls all the time. They're going to have a hard time finding places. And it's very bad. But at the end of the day, we still have to make our loans. We still have to pay our bills.
Yeah.
Did I answer
Thank
that
you.
question?
Yeah, absolutely. Very helpful. And I think, the perception of the greedy robber baron landlord who all he cares about is squashing people and making as much money as possible. Like that's not most landlords. There are those that are that way. And, Tracy, you're a good-hearted person and you didn't buy that place saying, oh, I can't wait for people to, get kicked to the street or anything like that. But we are business owners with hearts. How about that? Put that on a t-shirt. For me, when I don't own Section 8 or properties that are approved for Section 8, mainly just because I haven't had to do it on the properties that I've purchased. But from what I understand,
I have
go
two
ahead.
people on Section 8 that I allow. Not all my properties are approved, and they are great tenants. Unfortunately, it's really hard for people to get Section 8 nowadays because the list is so long. But I'm still running my unit. So my 53 unit, I have a lot of studio apartments. And my studios are very nice, and I rent them for $525, very affordable. I probably could get way more. But at the end of the day, I'm making the money I need to make to keep these people here and give them a safe, nice place to live. And they appreciate, at the end of the day, they appreciate they appreciate me and my rent's paid on time every month. Cause you're not going anywhere for a nice place at 525.
Absolutely. And I was just gonna piggyback on that, that I think, yes, we could always make an extra dollar per door, but the highest cost as a buy and hold investor is turning a property that got trashed by a previous tenant. And so don't get tenants that are gonna trash the place. And, we could have a separate conversation around that. But B, if a property could rent for $1,000 a month, for me, I'm glad to rent it for $925, because what's $75 a month in the grand scheme of things? If it means that I've got someone that I'm excited about, that's wanting to stay, that feels like it's a good relationship. And Tracy approaches it the same way, where it's like, hey, you could probably get it for $650, but for $525, you're making money, and you don't want to be turning 5 units a month just because people are, can't afford to live there. So I think that's the right approach.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, just make sure you're doing your preventative maintenance every 6 months, every few months, to make sure those places are being taken care of. I do it religiously. To
Yeah.
make sure I'm not, at the end of the day, when they're moving, my places are not trash.
Mm-hmm.
Preventative
Good for
maintenance is
you.
very important.
It is. It is. I'm glad you're on this, Tracy. I hope you would be, because I know you've got a lot of experience in this space. All right, last slide here. We're a few minutes past time, so thanks for hanging with me. Last slide here. This is a favorite from Jose. Tara, have you heard this one before?
I don't remember.
Education without implementation is just entertainment. So what's your aha? What's your next step? And by when are you going to do it? Would love to hear a few of you share, what's something you picked up, and what does it mean for you and your business?
I think, for me, I know this stuff really well, but just kind of getting back to the basics, kind of get you back on track, because, it's shiny object syndrome, there's analysis paralysis, there's everything that can stop you from doing the thing, and just kind of just do it.
Mhm.
It's kind of one of those things for me, because, I overanalyze everything.
Mhm.
Reanalyzing I need to find my cash flow goal number again. What do we call it before, the freedom number, or
Mhm.
something like that?
Mhm.
That's what I need to find.
Never lose it again.
Yeah, well, it changes.
Yeah.
Sold the motorcycle,
Mhm.
there's some other things like that, so.
Mhm. I think I mean an ongoing relationship where it's not like, oh, where am I? Like when you sell it, you change it, like just it's in the spreadsheet. What else? Any others?
I think it just makes me feel a little bit more comfortable. Like, I think because we have like a plan, and he's more numbers, I'm more colors and,
Mhm.
that creative side, and.
Yeah.
I think for me, understanding that if we just have a few formulas, and if we're abiding by those formulas, it makes me feel a little bit comfortable about moving forward.
Mhm.
I'm comfortable knowing my spreadsheet's not too far off.
Yeah.
And that way, like, what we put in place is. It's just getting that first one and getting the financing for it, which we are finally in talks with, so.
Good.
First one's always the hardest.
Yeah.
It's easier from there.
I'm like you, I'm an overthinker, so
Oh.
it makes me a little nervous,
No,
because
it's
I'm
not
very
somebody's
conservative with stuff like that.
Well, and as is true with so many things, your first one, and I would say your first couple, they won't change your life. Oh, I'm making an extra $150 a month or whatever, no one's family tree is changing through that number. It's more about getting on base than it is hitting a home run your first time. And so I think sometimes the analysis paralysis, like, whoa, what about this? And for better or worse, in so many aspects of my life, I'm like, well, I know enough. I'm just gonna, go and do the thing. And my first 3 deals that I bought, like months in, I'm like, did I buy was that the right idea? And it worked out, because real estate's a great asset, that when a quality property is bought in a decent part of town, over time, it works out. So long as you don't have like, oh, I need to make this by this, you know, if your parameters are tight, and if I don't do this by then I'm hosed. That's why I've never flipped. It's just like, I don't need that pressure in my life, at this stage, but, just get on base. In your first one's like, oh, well, we made a few bucks, but it's not until you have a handful, like I'm at a place now where my houses buy houses, because there's enough equity there that my lender, I say, hey, here's what I need. He says, done, because you've got enough equity in the deal. But that took years to get to
Yeah,
that point.
that's our end goal, I think, you know, getting to that point. We're close to it. end goal.
Yep. Any other thoughts? I'm gonna stop the share. Tracy, Jimmy, Jenny, and others who are here, thank you for joining on Zoom. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays.